don't want is our faces on camera.
Oh my God, macchiato, so cute. Yes. Hear me, O spirits, O water.
What I hope for is that we collectively have the capacity with our bodies, with our spirits, with our minds to overcome what it is we've been given.
So mote it be.
So mote it be. So mote it be.
Absolutely disgusting. This is America. This is our America. Freely cursing the president. Unreal.
Place in American politics, in American culture, and certainly not in democracy. And the idea of trying to override through magical means the will of the President of the United States, I think is very sick.
There's nothing wrong with calling out to the universe a request that humans do no harm. That just seems like what we should all be doing every night at midnight.
I ended up not being able to make it. Like I'm gonna get here at like 10.
Magic, a not so modern form of entertainment, the art that has been practiced since the Golden Dawn. Scrying or seeing, healing or causing harm. Today I want to discuss black magic and the mighty influences of this superpower. What does the infamous Hollywood really know about invoking spirits and casting spells? Whether they're self-proclaimed psychics, spirit guides, or highly respected druids, they're all involved in a deceptive practice and are prisoners of these dark forces. Many faces and hats are worn, and I want to share with you what those tools are and what they're actually used for. There's an ancient tale of giants or trolls that are highly skilled wizards and witches, and this one in particular, she's a giantess. She's a Yule giantess who's said to be over 1,000 years old, okay? And this is a very real legend, okay? She and her family are said to reside in lava caves in the Demi-Borgir Mountains in Iceland. Her name is Grilla, and allegedly these caves contain the homes of European nations' most brutal and vile trolls, the very first magicians of the earth. Demi-Borgir means dark castles in Iceland, the original dwelling place of elves, ghosts, fairies, witches, and of course, giant trolls. The Demi-Borgir, or the Black Forest, contains many highly formed rock formations or petrified remains, where highly sensitive nature surrounds these caves. In fact, the Game of Thrones was actually filmed there. So you'll see these cliffs and these mountains that's depicted in the Game of Thrones, okay? Queen Elsa also was, or Frozen, the movie Frozen, but Queen Elsa had received assistance from these particular trolls at the Black Forest as well, okay? So, but sometimes they're referred to as hobbits. But these beings have magical abilities, okay, as does the giantess Grilla. Now, the word troll has many different meanings, such as demon, and the Germanic word means hostile monster, okay? And they come in many different sizes, like dwarf-like beings, okay? Smaller than children, adult size, like you and I, and then they have the huge giants, okay? And they're very horrific, okay? And they actually love to hunt and eat children. Now, could this be where modern day witches get their sadistic, ritual, abusive behaviors from? You know, from the first witches practicing in the woods at nighttime. And everywhere in Iceland that you look, the rocks are very peculiar. If you look on the hills, if you look on the mountains, you'll see these outlines of faces. And rumor has it that trolls are immediately petrified when they are touched by the rays of sunlight. And that till this day, not even water erosion can cause destruction to the faces that appear in these mountains and on these rocks. So, it actually gives the locals and the travelers the creeps when they look at them. And the first ancient witch, Grýla, can be seen depicted all around Iceland City Hall. She and her husband, Lepalau, they walk around, or she walks around, and she carries a sack full of children, okay, of all things, okay? And there's true descriptions and first-hand accounts of missing children and families and individuals who were chased by this hideous horned-headed witch, okay? And she even has like hooved feet, all right? Now this witch, she actually has children, okay? And her children are known as the Yule Lads or the Yule Brothers. And of course, these stories are now considered folklore since there have been so many years that passed, since they were originally told. But there are lots of photos that are taken inside of the Christmas caves or the Christmas house, okay? And this Christmas house is a very real place. And locals say that this is exactly how the giant cannibalistic troll looks, okay? So they have her inside of the caves. Outside of the caves, you can actually see her cauldron or her witch's pot, which she, actually cooks children in, okay? And this particular pot actually is inside of airports as well, all right? And Grýla actually forces her brothers to stir the pots, that have children in them, so she can make soup, so that her brothers can actually earn their keep, okay? So this is a very, very sadistic story, but as I said, this is the first story ever told of a witch and how she hunts children and how she eats children, and we still hear these stories being repeated today on a modern level, okay? So speaking of children, I want to talk about her children and a little bit of a detail before we get a little further. So the 13 Yule Lads are these 13 little trolls that are not nice, okay? And actually, I just want to say this. It's actually depicted in really old books, accounts of there being over 200 trolls, but that to this day, or 200 children, 200 little children of Grýla. Lepalau, her lazy husband that she has now, is actually her third husband, and the 13 Yule Lads are actually Grýla and Lapalau's children, but Grýla actually has 70 children altogether, okay? So I want to talk about the Yule Lads a little bit in their descriptions, okay? So the first Yule Lad, he comes out at night, and his name is Sheep Coat Clod, okay? He comes out on December 12th, comes out in the nighttime before Christmas, and he said to molest sheep, okay? This Yule Lad molests sheep and sucks the milk from them, and he's known for having wooden feet and a peg leg, okay? I mean, gross. That's one of the Yule Lads. The second Yule Lad or Yule brother comes at night as well before Christmas, and his name is Gully Gawk. So that's Gully, Gully Gawk. And he's known to hide in barns and steal buckets of froth, okay? So if you don't know what froth is the bubbles that rise to the rim of buckets or cups, sort of like what beer would do when you pour beer in a cup, and that that froth that goes to the top. So that's Froth, okay? And Gully Gawk steals froth, and he steals the entire buckets, okay? Only to find that, you know, if there isn't any at the top, he'll take the whole entire bucket. And, you know, farmers come out, they look, and they notice that their buckets have disappeared. All right. Then we have a third Yule Lad whose name is Stubby, and he's known for being unusually short, and he steals pans and pots and crusts and that sort of thing. So when families wake up on Christmas morning, they have no dinner, they have no pans, they have no pots, and so that's what the Yule Lads are known for. They're known for going in and actually stealing things that are in the neighborhood and stealing out of the locals' homes, okay? So there's 13. You can look them up whenever you get a chance, okay? But I wanted to bring up the place. There's this Norwegian place in Iceland where there's these catacombs, and it's said to actually be the fallen place where Satan landed, okay? So I know that we have two sets. We have the fallen angels, and then we have Satan, who was actually cast out of heaven, okay? So, you know, the demi-bourgeois in the Black Forest in Iceland is where Satan is said to have fell when he was cast or thrown out of heaven, okay? And the reason why I mentioned that is because a lot of dark nature things come out of this particular area, okay? And if Satan had fallen there when he was cast out, or if he was actually thrust onto, you know, into this particular place, then it makes sense that this is where all of, you know, the education, you know, comes from, in terms of hunting children, eating children, sacrificing children, and that sort of thing, because pagans have lived in Iceland since the 9th century, okay? And there are actually, you know, lots of moving parts to that, but I will just say that there are actual records that Satan actually did land in the lava caves, and that he actually does call Iceland home, okay? So we'll get into that a little bit more deeper as we go along, but just know that real tourists do come to see the sleeping quarters of these caves where these witches and these lads are said to lay and sleep. You know, the volcanic activity, the geothermal areas, the glacier lagoons, it's all a very real place, okay? And you know, everyone in Iceland either knows someone, or they themselves have actually come across these giant witches, okay? And Grilla herself, okay? So she's said to be over 1,000 years old and older than Christmas itself, okay? So I do believe that this is where Satanism, Druidism, sorcery, and all of the magic, I believe, was actually born in Iceland, okay? So, you know, we're gonna move along, but let's just be clear. We have the Yule Lads caves, we have the demi-bourgeois or the Black Forest, where, you know, we hear tales of children that are chased in the Black Forest for fun, okay? We hear tales about, you know, the SA, the abuse that's going on with the children in America being brought over to this particular area and being hunted in these forests, okay? So we still hear things like that going on today. All right, so now let's talk about the actual hats that the witches wear, okay? From the ancient hats to the modern day hats. Let's break down the witches' hats and what they actually mean. The most popular hat that a witch would wear is a pointed hat. And there are many theories on how and where the hat first originated. One theory is that in 1215, the Fourth Council of the Lateran issued a law stating that all Jews must wear identifying headgear. and then a pointed hat would then start to be worn by them, known as a Juden hat, Juden. And that was adorned by the Jews. And this is when most people started to believe that the hat became associated with black magic, satanic worship, and other acts of which the Jews were accused of partaking in or teaching to the local women at that time. And another theory is that the witch's hat has its origins associated with Mithricism, and that's a Roman Greek mystery cult after the sun god Mithras. And, it could have been the Puritans, it could have been the alewife hats, either way, no matter where the exact beginnings come from, one thing that everyone agrees on is that the symbology of the witch's cap and the meaning of the cap is all the same, no matter what part of the world you travel, no matter, what time, whether ancient times to modern Hollywood movies. Women who wear this hat harness an abundant amount of knowledge, and everyone does agree on that, whether it's of herbs, whether it's the elements, whether it's the uh, you know, uh, spirit speaking through, what is that called when the spirit speak through the people? You all know things be escaping me. You know what I'm talking about when you go and speak to people that have passed away. But either way, alchemists, they all have a lot of knowledge, okay? A lot of knowledge of the world and herbs and elements and everything like that. But the illustrations of the witch's hat are endless, okay? As far as the characters that can be seen sporting the pointed cap, okay? And we all know that little children like to dress up as witches on the 31st of October, which is a pagan holiday celebrated here in America. And oftentimes you'll see the witch accompanied by a familiar spirit known as that black cat, okay, and a household broom. And by the way, Grilla had a black cat as well, whose name was the Yule cat. I should also mention that movie, Lord of the Rings, that was filmed in Iceland, it had a lot of characters. One included was a witch named what was it? Actually, he was called Witch King or King Witch of Angmar or something like that. And he was from the Lord of the Rings. So, we all know, we all can agree that the witch's pointed hat has been a staple in America for a very long time, okay? No matter who you are, a witch would wear a pointed hat before your time. That's how long the witch's cap has been around. Now, let us talk about the warlocks or the men associated with these caps. So the cat is always usually seen with the witch. Now, the witch is the practitioner of witchcraft, and points of entry are mostly bloodlines of the covenant. Now, it can be taught, witchcraft can be taught to others outside of the bloodline, but for now, we'll discuss the wizards and warlocks, okay? Now, a warlock has oftentimes been associated with men. So the warlock is a person or a male who has broken the oath, and he's considered to be a deceiver, much like the devil. The devil has that term of application associated with his name as well, the deceiver. Now, a wizard is considered a complete opposite of a warlock. So the wizard will do good, binding, breaking, canceling curses. And more of a shocker that you may or may not realize, but warlocks are actually hybrids of a witch and a demon. So an adolescent warlock is a demon seed, a male who, when created, his bloodline witch mother, who has had an immaculate conception, Now, keep in mind, we're talking early etymology and how these titles and terms were assigned, which I don't know if it is like that today, but I do try to travel as far back as I possibly can on the topics sometimes, and this is just one of them, if you will. Now, as I said, the witch that is being sworn in, she then seals the deal with intercourse, and this is during the sexual ritual initiation ceremony, okay? And so when that sexual ritual happens, the power of the warlock is transferred into the woman. Now, at the beginning stages, the very beginning of this particular pregnancy, the female witch would either have sex directly with a demonic spirit or the actual warlock himself. Now, and if you've been riding with me from the beginning, then I'm sure you've seen an earlier video on the incubus and the succubus I did about the statues of the incubus and succubus perched on the federal buildings. So either this particular spirit inserts, spiritual semen, or physical semen would come from the demonic realms. Either way, and so that male warlock is then, the father of that particular child. So, basically they themselves, the hybrids, they themselves, that's how they become hybrids, and that's how they're created. Okay, so now you know what I want to talk about. Actually, let's talk about, I can give you a really good analogy about warlocks and wizards and that sort of thing. Let's talk about Harry Potter for a second, because he's a perfect example. So he's considered to be a wizard. Okay, so he's a little guy, a little adolescent wizard guy. He wears his pointed hat, his long cloak, and he can even transfer himself into animals and such. Now, if he breaks his oath, okay, that he was taught, and he goes ahead and breaks that oath that he was trained on, he would then be considered a warlock. Okay, he would then be considered a warlock in that particular dark realm. All right, and once he reaches a certain age, he'd be an adult warlock. Okay, so and then if he has a child, he would more than likely have that child with a witch. Okay, and so that's how that goes. I mean, it's mythical, it can get deep, and there are a lot of sophisticated dark networks associated with it, but I did try to bring you as much as I possibly can from what I learned about this particular world. Okay, so he would basically, when I say Harry Potter, he would lose powers, and then he would have to reteach himself to become the ultimate wise man, and this is how you would get an actual warlock. All right, now let us talk about the party hats. Okay, the infamous party hats that are worn during birthday parties in America. This is actually seen as a crown of knowledge as well. And so the infamous party hats that are worn here in America during birthdays, it mimics a dunce cap. Okay, now let's talk about the dunce cap for a second and where that comes from and how it was introduced. Here in America, we've seen this hat used as some sort of disciplinary tool for children who were slow at learning or disruptive. So basically the dunce cap was used to degrade and embarrass students, okay? And they were looked at as some sort of a dimwit, some sort of a fool that sat in the corner, okay? Now, we still see people in Hollywood undergo embarrassment rituals for being disruptive, like the time when we saw Shia LaBeouf, who was made to wear that paper bag on his head. I'm sure that you all probably seen that. If not, you can go back and take a look. I'll try to stick something in to give you a memory, a refresher. But in any event, John Duns Scotus, he was this notable Scottish philosopher, okay? And he hailed out of Duns, Scotland. He was a university professor. He was a Scottish Catholic priest. He was a theologian. He was a lot of different things. But in any event, he worked with a lot of other gentlemen that he would teach, and they longed to call themselves dunce men. Okay, so that's where the term comes from. But in any event, we'll stay on the surface for now. But he believed, John Duns, he believed that the person who wore...
They're doing here? Coven of the Raven are doing their part.
If you'd like to participate in the ritual that's been making the rounds online, members from the Coven of the Raven Moon say this is all you're going to need. But they tell me the ritual they're doing here is going to be a little bit different. Witches from the Coven of the Raven Moon say they're doing their part to make sure America doesn't end up watching its own horror story.
So it is the end-all, squash-all of all negativity, and that's a beautiful thing.
At midnight, covens from around the world will be lending their energy to cast a spell on President Trump. High Priestess Amy Jean Gooseland says witches from her coven will be using a ritual that will help keep negativity out of the Oval Office.
Basically what the spell does is it prevents the person in question from being able to draw energy from any negative sources, and it prevents the person in question from being able to project any energy that is going to have negative or hurtful outcome on other people.
And while the effects may not be immediate,
sometimes things can happen as soon as the next day, instantly, sometimes 3 months from now.
Members of this coven say the binding spell will make room for more positive energy to flow into the White House.
We do actually have coveners who are Trump supporters. They would not have a need to feel binding him was a hindrance, because what it's going to stop him from doing isn't anything they should want him to do anyway.
These coveners say it's just a matter of time before we see what's in the cards.
Good health and prosperity and abundance for everybody, and that I think that it is all there to be had for all of us. And all hail Coven of the Raven Moon. Blessed be the witches.
In Flint, Miranda Parnell, NBC 25 News.
Now, see, we keep on hearing how Hollywood has been normalizing sorcery, how movies have been, dabbling into witchcraft and just pretty much all things occult. And because people have been so silent, now we're seeing witches on the mainstream media stations admitting to hexing the President of the United States of America. Okay? And accepting this filth, these dark practices are so widespread, but by accepting them, Americans should really be ashamed of themselves, but they're not, because, witchcraft and paganism and Satanism it never went away, but it's definitely on a comeback big time. Okay. Like from all of the little magic circles that they celebrate in Massachusetts, in Salem, Mass, the crowds just grow. Every year, there's more and more witches that are celebrating than previous years, okay? We've got, the Beyoncés, the Lady Gagas, that's all a part of this New Age tradition. And from 2004 to 2023, there are over 3 million on the record as adherent to Wicca, okay? And that's according to the Trinity College in Connecticut. But can you just imagine how many practitioners are not on the, quote unquote books, okay? That kind of just, claim that they do their thing, by themselves and solitary, how many witches that there are that's pretty much off the record. It's probably half the world, pretty much. And basically, This is the great falling away. Okay, those that light candles and recite chants for protection and kneel at altars honoring the dead, leaving offers, human burnt offerings, whether it's bay leaves, milk, wine, cloves, whatever it is, okay? And they call it strengthening loves, whatever it is. I call it a love spell. They do so many different things, but this, my decode family, is the great falling away. Is what we are seeing is the great falling away right in front of us, and it has been normalized, and people are just so silent. They really truly feel like they don't have a voice, but we do have a voice, and we gotta let these people know that we will not stand for witchcraft on our mainstream media stations, okay? In places like Saudi Arabia, witchcraft is against the law. They will behead you for even being a psychic, okay? There was this Lebanese television presenter, and his name was Ali Sabat, and he had went just to Saudi Arabia on a visit, okay, and was arrested and sentenced to death for witchcraft, okay? And he was accused of fortune telling on Arabian channel, like a satellite channel on TV, okay? So there are countries who actually press charges against people in the court of law for practicing sorcery in front of millions of people, okay? And these are the type of things that we need to get back to doing, okay? These people need to be prosecuted for what they're doing, okay? Okay, so now let's move along to an ancient headdress that is rumored to be worn by rich witches, okay? Not a rich bitch, but a rich witch, okay? And that's the hennin and tantor hats. Now, the hennin hat is most commonly worn in France by women of nobility, and they would appear in a time period of the 1400s onward, okay? And the hennin hat was generally 14 to 18 inches high and was generally accompanied by a veil. that would usually like come out from the top. It would emerge from the cone, and then it would like fall onto the woman's shoulder. Okay, and the tantor is very similar to the hennin, and the tantor was actually popular in East Mediterranean, okay, during the 19th century. And most tantor hats were made of gold, and they reached as high as 30 inches or 76 centimeters. Some were encrusted with gems, pearls, diamonds, gold, okay? And all of that was held in by ribbons that would tie around the woman's head. A silk scarf would tie around the woman's head, around the base of the veil, and that's how they would attach the peak of the hat. And that tantor hat is mostly worn by Lebanese women, okay? It's obsolete now, you see them as costumes, but back then, you know, in the 14th and the 15th century, it had a strong meaning. So the composition, the height composition was in proportion to the wealth of the particular family or the owner of that particular headdress, okay? And most often Lebanese princesses would be seen wearing those particular hats. So if you was a female born into nobility, generally you would be seen wearing that particular headgear. And you would think that it was only worn on special occasions, you know, like some sort of customary occasion, but no. The hat actually was not even removed during sleeping, okay? But it would most often be presented to the bride at a wedding from her husband. So, you know, she would be considered, you know, it would be considered that she would be honored, you know, to get one of those hats as a gift from her husband, okay? So that's the Middle Eastern Arabian background of the tantor and the hennin hat. And the reason why they're in this particular video, this, video that we're examining witches and their hats that they wear is because, the background is that, these rich women, these Middle Eastern women lived elevated above people. They would live in the mountains above the rest of society. So that's where you would mostly see the hat. So you see all these rich people, they are just coming and going on top of the mountains. And it was rumored back then within the community that these families were actually rich because of witchcraft or some sort of spell that they placed on the other people to, revere them and worship them. And they had more, money and gold and, oil and, whatever it is that was of value, those particular families that wore that hat had that. And so it was rumored that they were witches. I don't know how true it is or not, but that's the tantor and the hennin hat. Now I want to move along to the Escoffian headdress. The Escoffian headdress we would see in late times, in ancient times, and we would actually see this in modern times as well. Okay, even cartoon characters were seen wearing the Escoffian hat. So let me tell you a little bit about the Escoffian headdress. Escoffian hat was a very fashionable headpiece. It was extremely popular in medieval Europe, and it was worn once again by the elite men and women. and it was made or constructed in many different shapes and sizes. Some were turban-like, others were heart-shaped, and it is also rumored that if you were into Wicca, witchcraft, and Druidism, then you would have preferred that your Ascofian headpiece resembled two horns. It was made of felt, silk, or wool, and then sewn meticulously to keep its desired shape. And it's also associated with Cicely Neville, which translates to the White Queen, who would often be seen wearing a variation of heart-shaped Ascofians. The more intricate the details, the more better. And women who wore this head covering were a part of the royal family and were considered high status, and most of them actually lived inside of the royal court. And sumptuary laws were the laws of the land of those days, and so this meant that luxury items were controlled to assist in maintaining a type of social hierarchy based on birth, influence, or economic incomes, okay? And the Ascofian was also known by moralists and religious groups, you know, like the commoners, the general masses, for depicting satanic imagery. So, you know, many of the people who didn't wear the Ascofian hat thought of the families that would have the Ascofian. They, would fashion them, or they would be shaped like goats or rams, and they would even have the material that looked like, goats or rams, and that rams and goats are associated with Baphomet. And, a Baphomet is a high status deity, or one of the devil's top representatives, okay? So, but once the Ascofian became unpopular and women no longer desired it, so about the time when the 16th century arose, that went out, the Ascofian went out, and then the gable hood became the preferred headpiece. So the gable hood, or the French hood, would be worn by the women of those days. Okay, and so if you take a look, I am going to show you what the gable hood or the French hood looked like, and then we will move along to the next section. So what we're learning is that these crowns and these veils and gable hoods are a symbol of some type of important knowledge that mostly monarchs seem to have been using, okay, throughout history. And some ancient depictions of the crown of wisdom show a garland of olive leaves, and that's a Greek association of knowledge. So their crown in Greece would be a wreath, a laurel wreath, or I'm sorry, laurel leaves or a laurel wreath would be awarded to winning athletes in ancient Olympic games. And that seemed to represent victory, honor, achievement, and wisdom. And in Norse mythology, the crown was also considered to be one of wisdom, some 9 noble virtues of wisdom. And in Freemasonry, the crown of wisdom symbolizes the attainment of divine knowledge and wisdom at its highest. So the crown of wisdom is often worn by philosophers, learned individuals, scholars, graduates. Okay, the crown is looked at as a tool, sort of like a reminder that knowledge is valuable, it's powerful, and whoever is wearing it has that. All right, and most people cherish and pretty much use these storytelling times to maintain their culture, because as outsiders come in and books are rewritten, a lot of traditions are actually lost. Okay, so as an important cultural family and community way to preserve, the traditions, they storytell. Okay, they storytell all around the world. Okay, and you used to could actually do storytelling in schools before the government started to insert books that they believed they wanted the younger generation to read and know. So in short, storytelling is just used as a means of preservation, as I said. And this is how most people keep and pass down their truths, okay? And I know many times I can remember my grandmother and grandfather, and I know you probably do as well, telling us stories that, about them growing up. And then I'll remember them and I'll tell them to my children. And then in time, those stories will be retold and your children will tell them to their children. And then it just becomes like a universal human experience. So most of the time, storytellers, especially in the earlier days, would actually put a hat on their head, okay? Symboling that they are, the matriarch or the patriarch, and they are the ones who, embody the wisdom of what happened before, the younger generations came about. All right, so now let's talk about the flying nun hat, okay, also known as the cornet. Now this is a type of hat that was traditionally known to be worn by Catholic nuns as a part of their habit. And this habit originated in the 15th century and was a way for nuns to basically represent their modesty, okay? And the flare shape of the cornet, even Lady Gaga was seen wearing one of these hats. But the flare shape of the cornet would also denote the rank of the nun, okay? So higher ranking nuns would wear larger and more elaborate versions of the hat, and it became known as the flying nun hat, all right? And it was popularized by a TV show called The Flying Nun, which appeared in 1967. So it ran from 67 to 1970, okay? And that was called the Flying Nun. And, it remains a recognizable, iconic symbol, okay? So now let's talk about celebrities in cartoons and the witch's hat that they wear. Some of them, even Rihanna, okay, they wear different headpieces. Rihanna even fashioned a bunch of snakes on her head, okay? I mean, that was just hideous. But anyhow, the point is that the actual hat, the witch's hat, let's talk about what they actually do mean. Let's talk a little bit deeper, if you will, about the meaning of the hat, okay? So there's historical and popular belief that the hat can and does carry magical powers, okay? So not just the hat, but also objects can be empowered with magical energies, okay? So some hats are used in magical ceremonies and rituals, and specific hats will actually identify the witch, just like we talked about with the flying nun's hat, okay? So the witch or the practitioner would, you would know who that witch is, how much knowledge she had by way of how tall the conical shape was on her head, okay? And the darkness just symbolizes, or the darkness symbolizes, it symbolizes the signals that the witch can call evil and disembodied and dark spirits onto her or wherever she is, okay? So, as I said, that pointed version of the hat is like an antenna, and it represents the witch's ability to channel and direct her magical energy to places, to people even, okay? So it's similar to a wizard's wand. So the wand and the pointed hat helps the witch focus his or her power in a particular direction. In some cultures, the hat's wide brim is a symbol of the moon. It's all about symbology, family. So the witch draws her power from the moon, allegedly, okay? All of this is allegedly. And during full moon, she's able to perform magical rituals that she actually learns on the spot at that moment. When I was younger, there was a TV show called Bewitched, and there was another one, I Dream a Genie, okay? And these witches had a lot of magical powers, okay? So in any event, the hat is basically, or has been, a symbol for centuries, okay? So, sorcerers and witches, they pass them down generationally. So we really don't know what they mean because it has such a deep, rich, long history, okay? And there's a lot of meanings, and all the meanings vary widely, okay, depending on the culture, okay? But in any event, there's some ancient witches of Subishi. They're from China, and they were found buried, still wearing a perfectly formed conical hat, okay, and a gauntlet on their hand. So a gauntlet glove is the gauntlet glove is a long glove, and it's protective gear, okay, and it protects your hand and your arm. Some knights would wear them. It would be a part of their protective gear as they went out and fight. Most of them are made out of steel, okay? So you wear the gauntlet glove on your hand, and it goes up over your arm, and birds can actually land on your arm or your hand without you injuring yourself, okay? So now I want to talk about the queens and the birds and the witches and the birds, okay? Because the two of them have powerful symbology that's related to one another, okay? So a queen holding a bird was a common theme in art, okay? It's been that way since the medieval times. And now the birds signal power, grace, and beauty. The birds were most commonly used were falcons, okay? They would use peacocks and owls as well, because those are the birds that were considered to be of luxury items in Europe, okay? And that particular art was called falconry, okay? And it was a popular pastime amongst the royals. It was actually a sport. It was a sport of nobility, falconry. And it was a way for the queen to display her strength, okay? So a queen holding a falcon would be a demonstration of her control over these powerful animals, okay? And the peacocks association were immortality and resurrection, okay? And so because the queen is majestic, she has beauty, she has wealth, and she has this divine right to rule over others. The birds were this visual, regal image of the queen, okay? So now let's talk about birds and witches, since we just talked about birds and queens, all right? Now, it's said that the witch is able to transform herself into a bird, okay? And preferably, the most often bird she would turn into would either be a raven or an owl, okay? And she would turn into one of these particular birds in order to carry out his or her mischievous evil deeds, okay? Now, bird witches are often depicted as older women, okay? And they have the ability to cast spells, they whistle, they hunt, they can sing, they can cry like a baby, okay? And if you get a chance, you can check out Shakespeare. He has a play called Macbeth. Okay, and it's looked at by a lot of cultures. Okay, it features a bird witch. Okay, and it supposedly is a true story, okay? So, allegedly. But anywho, the bird witches are seen as respected healers as well, okay? So, the witch has connections to shapeshifting, okay? So, whereas a witch can transform herself into animals, okay? So, that's what we're talking about, her being able to transform herself into animals, even though she prefers the bird, okay? But she's doing that with the use of her magic, okay? And the witch owl has a title name called the Lechuza, Lechuza, okay? And that's a centuries old folklore, okay? And it's still very influential today, okay? So you can see this bird lady, they call it a bird lady, and you can see her in Mexico, in Texas. There's still many sightings, and she's spotted all the way up until our day here in current times, okay? And it's this huge bird with a lady's face. She's 7 foot tall with a 15-foot wingspan, okay? And she has the face of an old woman, okay? And she only comes out at night. She flies through the air, and then she'll perch herself on a tree or on top of a house, and she's looking for people to unalive or curse, okay? Whether it's people who have wronged her or for people who have paid the Lechuza for her services, okay? And as I said, oftentimes her favorite way to lure in prey would be to actually pose as a baby, okay? So she would cry, and then, someone would come out of their house at nighttime thinking that they heard the cries of a baby, only to be encountered by the witch owl, the Lechuza, okay? So before we go on and talk about the jester, I just wanted to bridge a gap here and say that, these witches have very strong ties with queens, okay? So here in America, more often than not, when we think of witches, we think of queens, okay? And a lot of the stories that have been adopted from the Grimm brothers and Disney Pixar's movies, you see the queen and you see the witch. Where you see the witch, you see the queen, okay? Like the evil queen in Snow White, okay? Also known as the Wicked Witch. The sorcerer in that movie, she uses dark magic to pursue her evil agendas, right? Then we have the White Witch in the Chronicles of Narnia. The White Witch's her name was Jadis, and she ruled Narnia with all her magical abilities, okay? Then we had Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty. So Maleficent is the villain in Disney's animated Sleeping Beauty. And I mean, her magical abilities were just all the way central to the entire story, the whole plot of the story. Okay. And then we had Queen Ravina in Snow White and the Huntsman. Okay. And, Maleficent starred, what's her name? Angelina Jolie, and Queen Ravina in Snow White and the Huntsman starred Charlize Theron, okay? And she portrays Queen Ravina, who's not only a queen, but a powerful witch, okay? So the stories that we've been told and they wanted to feed us was that, a queen was absolutely a witch. MGM's 1939 Wizard of Oz. Okay, so we had good witches, we had evil witches, we had fortune tellers, okay, who directed Dorothy back to, or tried to direct Dorothy back home after she ran away. Because let me set the plot, because I loved that when I was a little girl, and I think that was a lot of our favorites. Okay, so what happened is Toto had bit a wealthy woman named Mrs. Gulch, all right, who obtains a sheriff's order to euthanize Toto after a storm. And funny enough, Mrs. Gulch was actually the Wicked Witch once she had gotten to Munchkin Land. But in any event, Dorothy, she basically, ran away, and a storm had brewed, and she ended up, having an accident and getting knocked unconscious, okay? And when she wakes up, she realized that her house had actually landed on the Wicked Witch of the East, okay? And so her sister, the Wicked Witch of the East's sister, the Wicked Witch of the West, tried to take her sister's ruby red shoes off her feet, and was actually pissed that Dorothy had ended up, crushing her sister. So, but in any event, those shoes were then transferred to Dorothy's feet, okay? And Dorothy had power in Munchkin Land the entire movie, and for half the movie, she didn't even know about it, all right? And so, also, a familiar spirit that was with the Wicked Witch was actually a flying monkey, okay? A flying monkey that wore a fez hat, okay? And that fez hat is from the Ottoman Empire, okay? And that's considered to be a symbol of Islam, a symbol of wisdom, all right? The King of Morocco used to wear a fez hat. Okay, and it comes from the city of Fez, Morocco. Okay, all of his royal guards wore it, his cabinet members, as all the palace staff wore this Fez hat. Okay, so the Arab leaders used to wear them. And by the way, I want you to be on the lookout for my video titled 17. It's about the Shriners. It's a must see, okay? Now, these Fez hat wearing flying monkeys are said to actually still be around, okay, in a place called Percy Warner Park, okay, in Nashville, Tennessee. This is actually their home. Harpeth Hills is the geologic region where these flying monkeys are said to reside, okay? And these Harpeth Hills flying monkeys are now classified as an endangered species, okay? So they're rarely seen by humans, but the monkeys are most active during low light, before dawn, and around dusk is when you could probably catch a mysterious glimpse of one of them, or maybe even an entire pack of them, right? And so witnesses that have seen them often mistake them for large owls, or huge hawks, or whatever the case may be. But there's lots of tales about them trying to carry away small dogs or lost runners, okay? Small dogs like Toto. But they're generally harmless, and when they pick up these frightened people or dogs, it's supposed to be some sort of a playful gesture, okay, by the flying monkey. But in any event, Percy Warner Park is one of the last known habitats before 1939, okay, which is when the Wizard of Oz was created, okay. But before 1939, the flying monkeys were seen throughout the Southeast. They had concentrated sightings in the middle of Tennessee, Appalachians, and the shy monkeys usually keep to themselves, okay. So they would have like smaller communities outside of Chattanooga, and they were even seen as far west as Kansas, okay. So we get it, Kansas. Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore, all right. So now let me add, if I may, that the organ grinders, okay, of the mid to late 1800s, organ grinders, they played music, okay, and they were said or rumored to be accompanied by a flying monkey as they entertained on the sidewalks, okay. So, they would either have the flying monkeys or the capuchin monkeys, and those monkeys were a 15th century popular pet, okay. So now let's talk about the ancient comedians or the jesters, okay? Jesters, they're also known as fools or court jesters, okay? And they were skilled entertainers who lived within the king's court during medieval times, okay? And they held a very unique and important role in the royal household, okay? So they provided amusement, they provided entertainment to the king and all of the king's company, okay? So their living quarters were typically provided within the king's quarters, okay? And they were usually in the lower levels of the basement of the palace or the castle, okay? And it was small and modest, but it was very nice, okay? And those spaces comprised of a bedroom, a study, and a workplace where they can actually practice their tricks and things of that nature, okay? And they were actually considered to be valuable members of the royal household, okay? As I said, that would basically allow them to have the privilege of being close to the king whenever required, okay? And so they were allowed to roam freely, okay, within mostly all of the areas, but preferably they had designated areas. They could go into the Great Hall, okay, they could go to all the gatherings, all of the feasts, and that gave them opportunities to perform acts and entertain the entire royal court, okay. And they actually, some of them had a permanent residence within the palace, okay? And some of them were just employed solely by that particular king, okay? And sometimes the king would actually rent these gestures out to other people, okay? So also, the Maroti, okay, I want to talk about the scepter or the baton that the jester would actually hold, okay, and that was like a prop commonly associated with a jester or a fool, okay, and the Maroti is a symbol of their trade, and it was often depicted as a wooden stick or rod with a painted carved head on the end, okay, and the purpose of the scepter was multi-fashioned, okay, so basically it was used as a prop during their performances. So they would use it as like in their little comedy routines, tricks, juggling acts, magic, okay? So dance performances, it varied, okay? And the actual Maroti itself varied in design, okay? But they were commonly featured as looking like the jester's face, okay? Or some sort of a mask, or some of them even had, like an animal creature that they would perform as, and the Maroti scepter would actually mimic that particular animal, okay? And so, the symbolism behind it, the meaning behind it was that they were basically allowed to speak freely, engage in their witty behavior with the protection of the king, okay? And so that's what that was about, and the Maroti did play a central part in the image of the scepter. So that's what that scepter is all about that we see the jester holding on to. And the reason why I bring up jesters when we're talking about magic and things of that nature is because the jesters have a close association with our modern day comedians, if you will, okay? Because a lot of these ancient jesters actually displayed a very how do you say, I'm just going to call it a depressive state. They carried a spirit of depression. They were often very sad. You know, they had that sad clown paradox going for them, as is the case with many of our comedians of this day, okay, of today. You know, we have a lot of comedians who, you know, can get on stage, they can make people laugh, they can perform, they make great money doing so, they travel. Some of them make certain particular, you know, comedy house or stops their home, and you know, more often than not they unalive themselves. The same thing happened with the jesters back in you know, ancient times, medieval periods. Why is that? Why do comedians hold such an aggressive sad spirit with them? Okay, so now that we talked about the ancient comedians, let's talk about our modern day comedians for a moment before we end the video. Okay, and let's try to figure out, why is it that a lot of them have committed suicide, you know, in the ancient times and today? I mean, suicide is definitely on the rise, and it happens in every line of work. But I just found that, you know, the comedians of our day, lots of them were actually depressed. And I felt that, you know, as I look at them, you know, and watch them, they really never really had an outlet. Okay, so they were very humorous, they were witty, they were loved and liked and required by everyone, but they were actually sad themselves. They had no one to make them laugh. They had no one to make them feel special. And, you know, I wanted to figure out why that was. Is it because they're closer to the higher ups? You know, you want and you engage for these higher statuses, and then when you get there, you realize that you were better off as a quote unquote normal person. Okay, why is that? Why did that happen to our Robin Williams? Why did that happen to, you know, great comedians such as Richard Pryor? Okay, lots of them have, you know, indulged in drugs. Lots of them have, you know, as I said, been depressed, alcoholic. You know, alcohol has, you know, overtaken them to the point that they became alcoholics, you know, very much dependent on alcohol. Okay, and it was just this mysterious world, you know. And as I said, I believe that a lot of people don't realize that even the comedians themselves have to, you know, indulge in very dark practices. Okay, they have their own entire, what do you call it? They have their own entire boys club, if you will. A lot of this I'll be talking about in my video, title 17, and I want you to take a look at that, where we talk about the Shriners. Okay, so there is a such thing called the Royal Order of Jesters, and it is a brotherhood, okay, just like all of the other brotherhoods, okay, of Freemasonry. And a lot of them have declined. You know, they get into this spirit of making people laugh, they want people to be happy, and then they become you know, a Royal Order of the Jester member, and then they quickly start to decline from there until they're no longer here. And I just wanted to take a peek at why that may have been the case and why that continues to be the case today. Okay, you know, you've got your Martin Lawrences, you got your Dave Chappelles, you've got your you know, your Bernie Macs, okay? You have John Ritter, okay? A lot of these comedians, when you think of them, even though they were on sitcoms, they made us laugh. When you think of them, you know, their last days, we think of them, you know, going out real sad, even though, you know, what we knew of them was supposed to be happy people, okay? Why is this? We really may not ever know, we really may not ever find out, okay? But the modern day jesters or comedians, they used to call them fools back in the days. They've literally tried humor to escape a dark place, okay? So they say from their own mouths, being funny is not the same as being happy, okay? And if you're content with yourself, and most don't speak up until it's too late, oftentimes the reason for them not wanting to continue with life, and leave this world, and I'm just speculating that it could very well be a sad clown paradox, okay? And there's been studies and, there's been terms that's been used to describe, why comedians use humor as a form of medication, like drugs, or alcohol, or, sexual addictions. It does provide a short period of relief or satisfaction, okay? And then after, the comedian or the jester leaves the set, okay, they're left to deal with and even the magicians, they're left to deal with their inner turmoil, okay? So, comedians commonly, they don't hold themselves in high regards, okay? They often mark themselves, okay? They think of themselves as being very much unworthy, even though they, hide it under the guise of humor and comedy, okay? But in their profession, like 80% of them have been shown to display, high levels of low self-esteem, psychotic personality traits, okay, depression and things like that, okay? So, but we have to be careful with these magicians. We have to be careful when we go to these shows to, witness these comedians, okay? They're, dealing with a lot of things. We had Shia LaBeouf. I mean, for a while there, Hollywood had him wearing a bag on his head, okay? He was going to shows and everything like that. He would put himself on display, and the sign had read that he's not famous anymore, okay? And this happened after he had encountered a film festival. He went to a film festival, he acted really erratic, and then after that he was seen with the bag on his head. I don't know if that was some sort of punishment or not, but we do have to be careful, because these people that are on these stages, these magicians, okay, these comedians, these jesters, they have been gathering energy of the audience members, okay, and they use those spectators as temporary fuel, okay? And the same could be said for the ancient comedians or the jesters, but that's a part of their routine, okay? Now, I don't know who's your most favorite comedian or not, it varies depending on your personal preference, but we have had some really renowned and highly influential magicians throughout history, okay? And some of the names would be Harry Houdini, okay, and he was known for his escape acts and his illusions. He would like push the boundaries.
I don't know if you know this. And I don't know if you're going to believe me when I tell you this. But what's happening right now in America is witchcraft's trying to take this country over. It's witchcraft that's trying to take America back over. And I want to tell you something else. I am not being political, but I don't see how President Trump bears up under it. He's as strong as I have ever seen a man be. But here's what the Holy Spirit said to me last night, and here's what he said for me to tell you. He said, tell the church that so far Trump has been dealing with Ahab, but Jezebel is fixing to step out from the shadows. That's what the Lord said to me. And I couldn't understand the other day when I was preaching in Houston why I felt something so much on this when I was preaching. I felt a real powerful unction on me when I was preaching this about intimidation, or I was preaching this about containment. But then last night when the Lord gave me this about the witchcraft, the Lord said he's been dealing with this, but he said pray for him now, because he said there's about to be a shift and the deep state is about to manifest, and it's going to be a showdown like you can't believe. So I'm coming to you as a prophet, as a man of God, and I'm telling you, it's time to pray for the president. Here's what it said. Jehu said, hope, peace, you say. He said, so long as the whoredoms of your mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts, there won't be no peace. Witchcraft was in full control, and witchcraft is what knocked Elijah right out of his position, took him out of power. Oh my God, I heard the Lord say there's going to be an attempt to take him out of power.